Welcome to my channel Sella Buzz. Yes, unless you're ill, in which case they say I kind of inform you that you're unwell. Believe I'm getting unwell. What occurs when two of the best performers in Hollywood share a history, but hardly ever discuss each Dustin and other renowned figures. Gene Hackman and Hoffman left an enduring influence on film with their innovative performances to date. Despite their early bond, Hoffman has largely been quiet regarding Hackman, considering Hackman's recent death in February, days after his wife Betsy's death in 2025 after Arakawa's passing. Hoffman at last talks. What was his message and why did he? Let's find out the body after waiting this long. The friendship between Dustin Hoffman and Gene Hackman, and for a moment, can you imagine struggles? Two of the best actors in Hollywood having trouble paying the rent and taking strange jobs and being told you'll never succeed. That was the fact time and time again. For a long time, Dustin Hoffman and Hackman, prior to being well known, they weren't born with wealth or fame and weren't regarded as traditional leaders. But there's something about their shared hardship created a relationship that endured a lifetime. Despite Hollywood's eventual push people in separate directions, Hoffman and Hackman weren't your average fresh-faced, attractive Hollywood actors. I would have preferred to cast neither of the men. Fulfills the stereotypical description of a movie star. Hackman was known for being tall and tough. He appeared too coarse and crude, for Hoffman's diminutive size and unusual appearance were often disregarded outright. They encountered around the late 1950s in New York City, both having aspirations to pursue acting, but having to deal with rejection everywhere they went, young, unidentified, and frantically attempting to enter a field that appeared solved to keep them out. But their sincere bond began when both of them received training at the Pasadena Playhouse in California was the location where they met Robert, another struggling actor, Duvall, who would later become renowned status. Hoffman subsequently made a joke in an at the Pasadena interview, "We were taken into those who couldn't make it cast ballots. Gene is my least chance of success, and I really took that personally." Weren't famous at this time. They were only two impoverished idealists who depended on one another to maintain motivation. Didn't become much simpler after they relocated to Hoffman and Hackman of New York City shared rent splitting in a small, dilapidated apartment. Hoffman, in order to survive an interview given to Vanity Fair, he stated, "The location was so terrible that walls were collapsing. Without each other, we couldn't even buy furniture. I discovered a mattress in a dragged alley, it inside, and my bed was there. Hardly enough money to buy food, let alone." Hackman took acting classes by himself. Whatever strange job he could locate, regardless of working as a soda jerk and moving furniture. Hoffman, or a doorman, had his fair share of odd jobs, such as secretarial work in a mental health facility. Neither was making any progress in Hollywood and even became accustomed to Daniel Hackman, who had participated in the prior to pursuing acting. The Marine Corps was especially hard on himself as a well-known. He was once advised by a Hollywood producer that you lacked the skills necessary to be an actor. You ought to pursue a different line of work. Many aspirants were devastated by scathing criticism. Actors. But Hackman persisted, and Hackman occasionally appeared, but not always, dangerously close to abandoning. He was hardly booking roles as an actor. Survivor. Feeling as though he was, Hoffman remembered that it was going nowhere. Were evenings when we sat in our small apartment and questioned whether we were insane. Gene, for assuming we could make it, particularly would suggest that perhaps this isn't, in my opinion. Every one of them had either that was the decisive factor. Whenever someone wanted to stop, the others might encourage them to continue. After years ago, Hackman told the New York Times, "Eventually, if Dustin and other guys hadn't, Bobby, I may have given up on them. Kept me playing the game with little wins. Them continuing despite the fact that they weren't getting well-known roles." Hoffman managed to land small roles in off-Broadway productions, and Hackman began performing small appearances on television. They were still not well known at the time, although they were gaining as you get closer. You recall that one step. One of the first significant turning points and history points were awarded once Hackman was included in The Invaders, a 1964 television series. Wasn't an important role, although the job was consistent. approximately when Hoffman began gaining recognition in the theater of New York, resulting in a minor yet significant the breakthroughs on Broadway. Hackman, only a few years later, in 1967, was cast in Bonnie as Buck Barrow, and Clyde in addition to Faye and Warren Beatty. The movie Dunaway was a huge success, obtaining his first Academy Award. Hoffman was nominated in the same year that cast of The Graduate by Mike Nicholas, which turned into a craze in culture and turned him into a star overnight following years of sharing an apartment and living on scraps. Upon encountering rejection, they were abruptly two of the most talked about movies in Hollywood actors in spite of their first difficulties. Both men received several Academy Awards and became some of the members of their generation, top performers. But what became of their friendship? Following fames remained close or pursued their careers. Separate them before we investigate that. We should examine Gene Hackman's early growing up. In Gene Hackman's early years, it wasn't simple to stand up for Gene Hackman. He experienced instability, adversity, and a desire for something bigger than himself. Born in San Francisco on January 30th, 1930, Hackman was born and raised in Bernardino, California, a working-class household that found it difficult to locate its foundation. Eugene Ezra. His father, Hackman, operated a newspaper press, whereas Anna Leah Elizabeth, his mother, worked a variety of jobs to support the family. The family endured the consequences of being adrift throughout the Great Depression. Thus funds were. Hackman was always tight from a young age, was captivated by movies and stories. Telling stories was more of an escape from life's challenges for him, but his early years were irrevocably altered. At the age of 13, without much caution or justification for his father, one day, he abandoned the family. Richard, his brother, little Jean, and their Hackman mother, to fend for themselves, later remembered the incident with a combination of "I was standing in anguish" and detachment. When my father drove away, he waved, and that was his picture. Father departing without a formal goodbye or any expression of remorse remained, for the remainder of his life. The lack of a father figure profoundly impacted his private life as well. What gave rise to his strong, no-nonsense attitude screen persona? He hardly ever discussed his father during interviews, as well as when he was frequently accompanied by an emotional Hackman would claim that the distance he just left, never going into any more detail than that with, after the death of his father, his mother was left to support the family, which resulted in, they moved in order to increase instability. Often, and Hackman felt excluded. Cider in each new location where he had trouble. School frequently gets into problems and displaying a lack of enthusiasm for studies, but his disobedient disposition also gave. He has a strong sense of independence that would subsequently characterize his career. When Hackman was 16, he had had enough of small-town existence and joined He lied while serving in the U.S. Marine Corps. It was his first time joining at that age. Genuine escape, a means of escaping the suffering from his father's desertion and begin creating his own persona on film. Partnerships and mischances for two performers who began Dustin and their careers side by side. Gene Hackman and Hoffman hardly ever shared screen in spite of their indisputable skill and a comparable ascent to fame. They never seemed to be brought to Hollywood united in an important movie. At the people believed that they were purposefully avoided collaborating, but situations influencing choices and their individual work decisions kept them apart. But reflecting on the lack of a genuinely, Hoffman and Hackman are fantastic. Working together seems to be one of Hollywood's lost chances. The only big movie they shared, the 2003 film Runaway Jury, included screen time, was a thriller about law that was based on John by the time of Grimham's book. Both men were legends of Hollywood with decades of highly regarded performances and several Academy Awards between them. They were paired off in the movie, and Hackman is a merciless juror in the film consultant who is prepared to violate the law, while a man who practices law and fights for justice. Gary Fleeter, the director, later remembered how that scene was significant because it was similar to seeing two titans clash at last, could sense the burden of their past, of the years they were employed in this field. It was decades of work, not just a scene. Combining acting, mastery into one, Hoffman later acknowledged it, was long overdue and I wish we had taken further action. Together, you would like to ask. However, why didn't they? There were several initiatives where they could have working together, but it never seemed to work out. One of the first close calls was The Grim French Connection in 1971. The thriller about crime that earned Hackman his, many people are unaware of, the inaugural Academy Award that Hoffman was first thought to but for the part of Popey Doyle William Friedkin. The director believed that the tough guy was a better fit for Hackman, tough detective, and the role ended up going to him in hindsight. It is difficult to think of anyone besides Hackman in that capacity, but Hoffman had accepted it, his career, and the movie may have gone. In a very other way, analogous Hackman was given Kramer's place instead of Kramer. The drama that won in 1979, Hoffman won the part for his first Academy Award. Ted Kramer, a dad coping with arduous custody dispute and divorce. Hoffman's emotional sensitivity was necessary, gave a performance that defined his career. However, based on preliminary reports, Hackman had additionally been a formidable contender for the part. The issue yet stands. Why did these two are never brought together in Hollywood? Significantly, some people conjecture that their very dissimilar methods of acting made hesitant directors adopt a committed approach. Hoffman, the actor, submerged himself fully in his roles, occasionally to answer the New York Times. He once said, "I don't always act like I live in the character. That's the only method I'm aware of." In contrast, Hackman was able to turn out no nonsense, which he didn't accept. He just stepped into it while behaving methodically, played a part, and performed it. William Friedkin, the director, once remarked that Gene doesn't make things too complicated, does not have to endure hardships for a position, he simply shows up and executes the work more effectively, more than everyone else, which could be another factor. That they didn't work together was their distinct, professional trajectories, but both men were renowned for their dramatic intensity. The films they chose varied. Hoffman has a preference for character-driven plays that examine deeply personal and mental challenges, as Hackman excelled in a thrilling criminal scene, movies and parts that needed a timing of a powerful presence. And additionally, scheduling was a factor throughout. Both actors were active in the 1970s and 1980s. Among the most sought-after stars in Hollywood, it was challenging because of their hectic schedules, in order for them to collaborate on a project when the 2000s rolled around. Hackman was approaching retirement, but Hoffman stayed active by accepting difficult roles. Hoffman stated during a chat with, "By the time we could have Vanity Fair, Gene had already made something work. I've always respected that stepping back. He was aware of when to leave him." Those who know both men well have frequently remarked on their various characters. Robert Duvall is a friend, behaving like a lifelong friend, and Heavyweight claimed they had never competed. The manner in which individuals believed they were respected too much for one another, so they simply entered various ways. And that's how it determined that Mike Nichols, the director. This is expressed by Hoffman and The Graduate. Hollywood enjoys creating sentiment competitions. But it wasn't that they were just two men who took distinct roads leading to the same location. The individual support for two men who began their life journeys together, wildly divergent directions. With his gregarious and reflective personality, Hoffman frequently interacted with the press and kept working well into his later years. But years later, Hackman was a private individual who hardly ever gives interviews and ultimately leaving the stage after acting all collectively. This disparity helped to the impression that they were far away, yet those closest to them insisted. There was always a basis of reciprocal. Hoffman had 6 children from his 2 marriages, youngsters, and gained recognition for his fervent debates regarding acting, frequently discussing his private life in interviews. Hackman, in contrast, always appeared uneasy among celebrities. Culture. He first married twice, to Faye Maltz, who he had 3 children with kids, and then to Betsy Arawa, kept his private life well out of the spotlight, and his perspective on fame was direct. And he perceived performing as an identity rather than a profession. In a rare Esquire remarked in the interview, I want to work, but I need the attention, and return home with this distinction in their fame-seeking strategies could have played a role. Hoffman has distanced themselves throughout the years, was completely absorbed in the field, regularly going to events that give interviews and remaining visible to the public. Hackman, however, moved away from Hollywood completely, favoring a more tranquil existence in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Among the most recurring inquiries regarding their relationship is based on whether they continued to communicate over the years. In contrast to several friendships in Hollywood that endured during the many decades, that minimal public proof of Hoffman and Hackman and his companion after their initial difficulties during interviews. Hoffman frequently praised Hackman, yet never made it clear that they were regularly contact when the Hollywood in 2005, the reporter asked if he and Hackman keep in contact. He acknowledged, but that doesn't imply that nothing occurs in life and careers develop. But that doesn't alter the Hackman whose past we share, contributed even. Fewer interviews were also quiet. When a reporter for Vanity Fair questioned him if he continued to communicate with Hoffman in 2008, or, "Not as much as I did," Robert Duvall stated. If it wasn't a contemptuous response, but reinforced the notion that there once over time, a strong bond had established according to mutual friends, but there was nothing negative blood simply drifting separate, naturally. Once, their lifelong buddy Robert Duvall said that everyone wants to make it. Dramatic, but sometimes things just happen in life. However, people are going in different directions. They were rarely spotted together. In public, a few instances showed their profound regard for one another, including the moment arrived. When Hackman was awarded a Screen Actors Prize from the Guild for his performance in The Bird, in his former acceptance speech, Cage astonished the audience by expressing gratitude. Hoffman referred to him as one of the best actors I've ever encountered. It was a unique recognition from Hackman, who wasn't. Hoffman is renowned for his heartfelt gestures, also made modest gestures of respect. In an interview with Charlie in 2012 Rose, he discussed his childhood and noted, "Hackman with respect, genius among the greatest. He possesses this amazing presence that you trust. All of his actions are not something you can impart. What may be the most illuminating, an insight into their relationship appeared in 2003 during Runaway Jury, the only important movie that they shared. Substantial amount of time spent on set. Allegedly had lengthy discussions regarding their childhood memories of their difficulties in Hollywood. Filmmaker Gary Flett remembered that they were more than two. When actors collaborated, there was, you could see the actual history there, it in the way they exchanged glances. But even though they clearly respect for one another, some have hypothesized that they might have had more profound unspoken disputes without a recorded feud existing. Their disparate personalities could have caused conflict during the past. One hypothesis is that Hoffman's careful and occasionally compulsive way of acting possibly conflicted with Hackman's more natural, uncomplicated style. Hoffman was renowned for his intense focus into parts, occasionally pressuring co-stars and directors to the limit of his ability. To Hackman's level of intensity, however, was realistic. He arrived, completed the task, and William Friedkin, the house director, once saw that Gene was impatient with. He enjoyed adding needless complexities to work quickly to get the shot and proceed. Might understand why that would not work well. Others think that with someone like Dustin, their innate separation was more related to using personal principles. Hoffman went on appearing to be in his 80s and staying dedicated to the field of Hackman, but after retiring in 2004, I never looked again. Returning to writing as the primary focus, and when questioned about retirement, painting, Hoffman once remarked, "I'm not sure how to. I'm Hackman, so stop acting," but informed GQ that I completed the necessary tasks. Check out Hackman's latter years and influence as Gene Hackman's years past conducted a nearly unprecedented action in. He vanished from Hollywood while many actors of his caliber kept on performing. Hack left well into their old age. Leave the sector according to his own conditions. No emotional finale to the grand farewell tour performance, only a silent farewell to his final. Welcome to the 2004 film role, Mooseport, and then he backed off from acting. Never gets back into the spotlight. In a rare interview years ago, he told GQ, "I didn't miss it later because I had time, and he lived for more than 20 years, so I'm done." In almost total seclusion in Santa Fe, New Mexico, is a long way from the Hollywood apparatus that once characterized. Throughout his life, There were no public participation in award shows and no appearances in contemporary movies that evoke nostalgia. Occasionally, paparazzi might capture snippets of him cycling or performing. Hackman still does most of the errands, remained hidden, concentrating instead on creating historical fiction and having fun a private life with Betsy, his wife. According to all reports, Betsy Arakawa was Hackman's rock for his last 10 years. After meeting, they were married in 1991, in the 1980s, and in spite of their 30 years of their relationship was characterized by an age disparity, one of close friendship and reciprocal support for the former classical artist Arakawa. The pianist established a consistent presence in the life of Hackman. Upon his retirement from pretending to assist in protecting him from the outer world, which enabled him to take pleasure in his peaceful existence free from the demands of, according to individuals close to the pair, fame, she served as his primary caregiver. His health started to deteriorate in his later, Gene Hackman and his spouse, Betsy's years. The dead Arakawa were discovered in their Santa Fe's house in New Mexico on the 26th of February 2025, saw a startling discovery. Moviegoers and those who have previously followed the famous performers that became reclusive in their later years. The situation pertaining to their at first deaths were unknown, but a Dr. Heather's news presentation on March 7th, Chief Medical Investigator Gerald revealed light on their last days. Gerald investigators claim that concluded that Betsy Arakawa was successful. First due to HIRIS on February 11th, pulmonary syndrome, an uncommon yet fatal condition virus that is mostly transmitted by rats. Hackman is already not feeling well, apparently passed away a week later. The 18th of February from hypertension and cardiovascular illness caused by atherosclerosis. Additionally, the doctor mentioned Alzheimer's illness that he had been fighting in his later years as a major contributing element, possibly the most devastating. The probability of revelation was that Hackman might not have even known about the death of his wife. With his advanced researchers studying Alzheimer's, think he may not have understood what had occurred or anything was done. In reaction upon discovering his body revealed no hydration symptoms, but his stomach was empty, suggesting that he hadn't had any food. A longtime friend for a while told for him, Vanity Fair Betsy was everything. She served as both his guardian and dearest friend, is the main reason he was able to spend his final years in tranquility while Hackman maintained his mental acuity. As he entered his 90s, his physical condition, had there have been increasing allegations of his decreased mobility was discovered when pictures from 2023 showed him looking weak while doing errands. But Hackman never made any public remarks about serious health issues. Near sources suggested he had been coping with age-related ailments for a number of, but after a few years, the true blow arrived. When his wife Betsy passed away in early 2025, suddenly, the lost were heartbroken. According to Hackman and his loved ones, he was never the same as a family before. The Hollywood Reporter heard a friend say, it damaged something inside of him that they had been after spending so much time together. Losing her took a less than a week later. A fragment of his spirit. Hackman himself died when he was Hackman had lived out his last years alone, but his impact was far from forgotten. His roles in the French Unforgiven, Mississippi Connection, Burning, and innumerable other movies remain the new staples of cinema history. Actors of all generations kept visiting him as a motivator, and his capacity, tougher, unadulterated genuineness to each character continued to attend acting schools, his most. The way he carried his legacy was amazing. Hackman never pursued fame for himself, worked to find the truth, and when he believed he had nothing more to demonstrate, is left without expressing resentment. Not because his enthusiasm had faded, but as he had carried out exactly what aimed to Dustin Hoffman's revelation for years. Hoffman had been quiet on his connection with Gene Hackman in spite of their mutual ascent to stardom in the past and sporadic swipes with the same positions. He hardly ever talked about their personal. Hollywood conjectured the relationship. Fans persisted despite the media's efforts to dig. Odd, but Hoffman is always the storyteller. In movies but selectively maintained in real life. His ideas are largely private. So changed in February 2025, when Hackman's death was announced. The entertainment industry by surprise, since Hoffman disclosed for the first time in years something concerning his lifelong friend, was not only to pay tribute to Hackman, but also to reveal the truth about their relationship. Separation and the enduring respect. Many have been asking for a lifetime. Inquiries such as why this is the most. The simple response is that it was a Hoffman's rare moment of vulnerability who had become more thoughtful. In his later, at the age of 87, he acknowledged to the Hollywood Reporter, "I didn't enjoy conversing about people while they were alive. He was, in particular, someone like Gene. He didn't want his name to be heard in private, being talked about in Hollywood or gossip conversation. But I believe it's time for the flood of affection for Hackman upon his death had moved from many places." Hoffman extensively uses social media. Fans, performers, and filmmakers shared their respect for the individual who had established Kevin Keener's grim characters for decades, referred to him as the actor's actor during the final member of their trio. Robert Duvall came from their days as struggling actors claimed that we were. Back then, only children were attempting to succeed. Gene never looked and did things his way. Back, observing everything that happened, Hoffman understood that what he had not spoken. It was necessary to talk about all these years, and so he took a seat and spoke candidly about. Although Gene Hackman is not a Hollywood legend, he had known the man long before, though what made him distinct from the others? Hoffman began, his tone tinted with fearless. Gene was with nostalgia, could notice it even when no one was looking at us. Hoffman remembered their formative years spent at the Playhouse in Pasadena, and afterwards in New York when Hackman adopted his harsh demeanor. He wasn't the person they were looking for. Anticipated to succeed, Hoffman acknowledged he didn't appear to be a matinee idol. Play the game, but he could act like a pro. Considering Hoffman's career as Hackman, I believe they talked with sincere admiration. Gene's problem is that he never played a false note without knowing if it was Little Bill Daggett or Lex, or Poe Doyle Luther convinced you at every turn. He highlighted The Exchange in 1974 as a show that was especially startled him when I saw that film and recall believing that this is the reason he doesn't. He says you have to do interviews. All of his efforts when he was asked if Hackman had any characters he wanted to play. Every time he played Hoffman, he laughed. Only one, however, let me clarify that I wouldn't have performed them as effectively as one of the most significant queries pertaining to their relationship was the reason they appeared to separated over the years of conjecture, varied from private disputes to envy in the workplace, but Hoffman swiftly put an end to any futile idea. He confidently said, "We were never enemies. Individuals enjoyed transforming things into a competition, but it wasn't that way. Began together, and then life took over. That's why they didn't remain inside." Hoffman hesitated before responding. The whole Hollywood stuff wasn't done by Gene. He wasn't doing anything or going to parties, gatherings. If you weren't present at his, you weren't a part of his daily life. He acknowledged that was just the way he was, that occasionally he hoped things had been distinct. And there were times when I wanted to contact out. I considered giving a call and writing a letter, but I would then assume, yes, he most likely doesn't wish to be bothered, and perhaps that was an error. On for decades, the two guys hardly ever spoke, to me, engaged, but Hoffman disclosed that they did speak one last time, and years had passed before Hackman's death. I don't know why I contacted him out of the blue. Even recall why I might have simply missed. Hoffman shook his head and laughed. Don't even believe that he was shocked. He shouted, "Hey kid," like no, when he heard me. After some time, they talked about their early hardships and the extent to which had changed, but they mostly chuckled. "John, you're the only guy I know," I told him. "Who could leave Hollywood without turning around? And guess what? Well, somebody had to do," he said. It was something else that people were interested in, regarding whether Hoffman regretted not. He paused before continuing to get closer, stating, "Yes and no, I believe we have our time and showed mutual respect. In our own manner. But do I regret not picking up the yes? I do use my phone more." But then here marked, grinning. Knowing Gene, he probably would have simply asked what you wanted. In one, Hoffman will characterize Gene Hackman. Sentence, he pondered, for a long time, before declaring at last that he was the toughest man I've ever encountered, and the most sincere actor. I've seen such words before, endured a lifetime's burden for Eamon, who had not spoken out against Hackman for. There had never been a rivalry for so long, or animosity that began with just two men parted ways and showed respect for each other, until Dustin's death. The passing of Hoffman Hackman was more than, it was simply the death of an old acquaintance. The conclusion of a phase in film, when questioned regarding Hackman's Hoffman, didn't contribute to the movie. Hesitant. No one was like him. Gene didn't pretend that he was a scary, could be humorous and vulnerable. And during a performance, he never lied. That's what caused him to fantastic. What are your thoughts on this revelation if he had displayed a few of this fondness during Hackman's lifetime? Leave a comment with your opinions if you liked this video, please share it and join this channel by subscribing.